CCTV.
They're here.
I was the Chief Information Officer at the White House. We forget the cameras are there. We're just doing our job.
All right, back to work. We got people to catch.
So you're going to see how we do our job in a normal investigation, but we're not going to explain everything about that job.
Oh, so she deleted her Twitter before she went on the run.
You can delete, but delete doesn't actually mean delete. You don't see it anymore, it's not top of mind, and you think it's no longer there. But the internet never forgets. That's why I don't recycle devices. I have my own little Smithsonian of all old equipment in my attic. The first thing we're going to be looking at is that circle of trust, to try and figure out who they may be contacting as they're trying to get away. We can and we will find you.
All right, well, thank you everybody for having me here, and I'm super excited to have this time with you. And a couple of things. I mean, first of all, when you think about who you focus on small businesses. Small businesses are the engine that fuels America. And so the work that you do is so vitally important. And what I want to be able to do is this next hour that we have together is to make sure that you get out of this what you need to take care of your customers. And so hopefully in the process, by taking care of your customers, you become that trusted advisor, and you become profitable, and you hit your goals, and you hit your sales plans as well. And so I want this hour to be a really good use of your time. We have the prepared remarks, and what I will say is maybe, I don't know how competitive this group is with the other cities and the other members of ASSCI, but we can try and keep the Q&A going and see if we actually have a better population of questions, and maybe this will actually be the best list of questions we get out of all the events, but I'm also happy to go over the prepared remarks. I also have an incentive plan for you asking me questions. So the first person to ask me a question is actually going to get a signed copy of my book, which my mother says is a must-read. And just make sure you connect with ASSCI, and they will get the book to you. So with that, before I get into prepared remarks, does anybody have any questions? So yes, sir. So Frank is going to get the book. Frank Davis.
The whole Facebook thing. Any big dealer has just really been known by everybody that scraping's going on. They have all your information and been dealing it. And does all his Maricopa really mean anything?
That's a great question. Was everybody able to hear that in the back too? I mean, it's a great question. And so I think there's a couple of things wrapped up in that question, Frank. So the first one is, there's the revelation of several months back about Russia meddling in the elections around the globe, not just the US. They've said that they've actually meddled in the UK elections. There's a belief they might have actually been a driving force behind the separatists in Catalonia, and so they kind of took different elections and different sort of displeasure at what's going on in the world and sort of stoke the fires there. Yeah, I mean, right. And so you start off with not just Facebook, but all of the social media platforms being caught flat-footed and saying, you're kidding, there's fake identities on here, and there's fake ads on here, and people are manipulating our force for good, and it's a force for good, you're kidding. And so they were all kind of flat-footed, which is really puzzling to me, because starting back in 2006, there's a report that comes out, and if you can't find it, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I will get it to you. It's called Freedom of the Internet. And so starting back in 2006, this research group with really good researchers has been sounding the alarm. First of all, they said, look at these countries who, when they don't like what's going on, they shut off the internet for their citizens. Then they started studying and saying, look at these countries who use social media to manipulate their own citizens into thinking they're the only ones who feel the way they do. And then they sounded the alarm, we think social media is going to be used for nefarious purposes, and so here we are. My prediction is, if we don't get this right, not just Facebook, but all of these social media platforms, if we don't figure this out and get this right, I believe that if not Russia, some other country unfriendly to us who has economic disadvantages is going to use that playbook and tweak it to actually ruin the reputation of American industry or an American company. They already know how it works, and if you think about Russia and China And North Korea especially, but also Eastern Europe, and then you have, I call them the stands, so Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and you look at the Middle East, they're economically disadvantaged. And they've been trying to steal our intellectual property. Many of your customers are targets of that, and we're doing a better job pushing them out, so why not go to reputation? So that's kind of one bucket of issues with Facebook, and I don't feel like they really have understood the enormity of the role that they play and how they can be a standard bearer for the rest of the industry. So you've got that piece. Then let's go to Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica is not going to be the last third-party data firm you hear about that your data has been sold to. And I'll tell you, if you look at many of your customers probably have a Facebook page. And one of the challenges that happens with that is, in order to have that persona, they make you actually set up a personal page, right? So I have one. I'm forced to have one because my kids carpool for sports, and all their study groups are private groups on Facebook. So that's what I have, and I've got a business account as well, because our business owners, a lot of them are there. So I don't know about you, have any of you, just raise your hand if you've ever pulled an archive off of Facebook for yourself or for somebody else. If you haven't done it and you're on Facebook, either as a company or as an individual, you need to do that. I do it multiple times a year, and I will tell you, I started going back through the old archives when they talked about how Droid users had their personal contacts sucked into some type of a data mart, right? Even though these people were not on Facebook. By the way, I have an iPhone too, because I was starting to go back to look, and I went through the transactions, and I realized there are people who will never be on Facebook in my contacts list. And I have my privacy settings so locked down. Clearly it was a glitch. Remember, these platforms are free, so these glitches happen, right? So there's that. Okay, now let's get into what happened on the Hill, right? Because that tells you whether or not they're going to change. And so what I did see was, a commitment to doing an investigation on all of the third-party data vendors they're selling the information to, but the horse already left the barn. And that's that's rear view mirror, right? So it's what's behind you, what's not ahead of you, right? And so I don't know that we're gonna get a really good feel from them from a product roadmap, whether or not they have a commitment. They're a publicly traded company. The product is you. So what are they gonna do to change their business model and still be profitable, but not violate your data privacy and your data rights? Here's the other piece. Again, sort of Cambridge Analytica, you may like or don't like what they did with that data. That data is patterns of life. Who else did they sell that to? And patterns of life, we use patterns of life on the show Hunted. The way I was able to successfully catch them in a TV contest, and the way I'm actually able to do forensics and help businesses figure out who did that cybercrime to their company, is you follow patterns of life. And so now the patterns of your life and other people's lives are in the hands of not just Cambridge Analytica, but other companies. So that, to me, I think is a really serious, if you take that data with that Equifax breach, and the Cambridge Analytica and what was shared is going to be the biggest data breach that was never called a data breach, because it all followed policy and nobody stole the data, they bought the data. Did that answer?
I think it's there to talk about the way. I mean, I've paid to get scrapes off the internet for competitors and gotten all the information off the site, perfectly legal, until they shut down their. In other words, you went to them and just paid from this scrape, and then it went off. I mean, it's not like they were nefarious in getting it. I think maybe the third party down just got it, and they didn't have something in the contract that said don't resell it.
Right, so I think the challenge with Cambridge Analytica is the other data aggregation that they do. And so what they said is they actually have 5,000 points of data for 250 million Americans. And so the question is, we as a society need to have a conversation around these privacy policies. So I always tell people privacy policies actually spell out the lack of privacy you have. But honestly, I think what you may see come out of this, based on my conversations on the Hill, bill, but don't expect it to happen for a couple of years, is some type of a privacy bill of rights, where from a regulatory perspective, if you're online and you ask people to opt into your privacy policy, that the default setting could potentially be, I don't want to share my data with third party unless you show me the ROI for me doing that. And now you're consciously opting into that scenario. I think we're 24 to 36 months away from that, maybe faster, if some other social media company gets caught selling that kind of data. Yes?
Along that vein, have you heard of anything, because even like the investigation into the sale of information to third-party vendors, is there any type of investigation that you've heard where not third-party vendors, but social media platforms themselves have given information for whatever purpose or political cause or whatever, and what's happening in that? Because I think the third party is important, but the social media vendors themselves have a responsibility to be very careful about how they give out information.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So there's a couple of things. So what you've heard Facebook say is they're committed to actually hiring more employees to actually do that due diligence, looking backwards, but also going forwards. The second thing is the social media companies have committed to something called the Honest Ads Act. Again, whether or not it gets passed on the Hill and signed by the president, who knows? But the Honest Ads Act, if you have any customers who do marketing and advertising on social media as a business, they're gonna have to go through a lot more hoops to prove they're actually a real business before they're allowed to place political ads online. But that could be a good thing, right? Now, the question is who watches the watchmen on that one, right? So there's gonna be that vetting piece. And then sort of back to your question, which is, well, there's this whole other group of kind of information sharing, and it could be opposition research for political campaigns, but it could also be things like, well, wait a minute, so all these parties that you post that you go to, or these events that you go to, and you're out having a good time and you have drinks, did they sell all that information to your health insurance company, who then looks at your form that you filled out the doctor, and you're like, yeah, I only have an occasional drink once in a while. And they're like, really? Because your Facebook profile says something different, unless you're just holding your friend's drink, which could be possible. So that's the question that we have to ask, which is, who do you sell the information to? And again, why don't I get upfront the opportunity to opt in or opt out based on the ROI for me? So it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. And obviously, I don't know if anybody here got a chance to watch the testimony on the Hill. Zuckerberg, I think, did a pretty decent job of kind of surviving, testifying on the Hill. I've done it. It's not something I had on my bucket list before I worked for President Bush, but I had to do it, and it's kind of one of those things you just want to survive, testifying on the Hill. But I think he did a pretty decent job. But there were, for me, I don't know about you, there were a lot more unanswered questions in my mind than there were questions answered. Kind of a historical accounting for what transpired. And I thought, members did a pretty decent job asking him questions. I think we asked our members, our legislative elected officials, I think we asked them to know a lot. So we asked them to keep up tabs on North Korea and China and what's our foreign policy, keep tabs on hometown America, where they're from. Oh, and by the way, do you know the inner workings of Facebook and how they aggregate our data, and whether or not when you leave a browser and you go to another browser, does Facebook follow you? So, some of the questions were sort of, kind of not elegantly asked, and maybe not as well informed as they could have been, but I thought overall it was a good start. Was that helpful? Okay, great. And I'll make my way around the room too, so people in the back don't feel like they'll get a chance. Yes, sir.
Okay, so on the Privacy Bill of Rights, that's 24 to 36 months away, maybe, is that just going to protect future generations, or do you expect there's going to be a backwards compatible, if your data's, if you're one of the 250 million people who 500 points of data are collected on, or somebody in their 30s, 40s, or 50s, those patterns of life are not likely to change all that much, maybe when they get into their 70s and 80s. Are we just done? From a privacy perspective?
I think this is where you have to be very vocal with your elected officials and let them know how you feel about this, because they're deliberating on this now. And so, for example, I think on a go forward, maybe they've collected the data, maybe they've purchased the data, and on the go forward, there could be legislation that says, I don't care if you have the data or not, you're allowed to use it this way or you're not. And I'm not a big fan of, let's just add regulation. I look at something like the financial crisis of 2009, and I know coming from the banking industry how much money we spent on GLBA and Sarbanes-Oxley and all the other laws that have been enacted since the 1920s, the very first and awful crash. And nobody went to jail in handcuffs in banking, but yet our economy collapsed, right? And I'm not saying I wanted people to go to jail, but my point is we spent a lot of money on regulatory compliance, and it doesn't stop bad things from happening. And it's money that can't be spent on innovation or revenue or marketing or strategy because it's spent on compliance. But I do believe it's time we need something in America. We've seen other countries step up and say, I'm going to have GDPR, for example, with the EU. And whether or not you agree with that, I think there's some merits to some parts of GDPR. There's the right to be forgotten, which you see Google and other social media and technology companies are fighting tooth and nail. Facebook even just said, even though we've got a headquarters in Ireland, we are not going to adhere to GDPR except for those citizens of those countries. So we're not going to run a GDPR-like model for the rest of the world. We're only going to do it for those users. So it's just kind of interesting to see where that goes. And instead of that being the new high standard and the new bar, it's going to be, right now, for the social media companies, it's a one-off. So that Bill of Rights, I think, is so vital to, okay, to your point, the data's already been collected. So what are the limitations of being able to use it?
Real quick follow-up question on that. Is anybody focused on defining what the privacy rights of Americans are today, or even worldwide citizens, or is it more, we're going to accept whatever definition you have and go down the road from there?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And so when I was on the Hill right after the Equifax breach, which is when you really had these conversations around the Privacy Bill of Rights, and then I've had some follow-up conversations with some of the staffers. It really comes down to, I think, a couple of fundamental things. Now, whether or not the lobbyists on sort of the other side of the argument are able to kind of make a better case, we'll see. There's a couple fundamental things, right? So your Social Security number, it's everywhere. And it's in the hands of lots of bad people, along with lots of your public information. So since it's gone, we need something else. And why is there like one key to everything in your life? And when we talk about in security, one user ID and password for everything is not a good idea. So why do we have Social Security number, and that's how you file your taxes? That's how you get your Social Security. That's the first thing people ask for to do a credit check. It's the next thing your hospital asks for with your health insurance policy number. And so to me, it starts at sort of some fundamental things around why is it on you to prevent fraud from happening to you, right? So that's kind of one piece. The second piece is freedom of expression, right? So in a forum like this, we could have a really healthy debate of whatever you want to have a debate on. And it's just us here having this conversation, unless it's recorded, which in some states is illegal unless you ask for permission. So you think about the things that we've spent hundreds of years honing societal norms for conversations and data, that in the digital age, it's just like, whatever. And so to me, some of those fundamental discussions around how do we have sort of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and oh, by the way, if it's in the digital world, it shouldn't be used against me. But it is, it's collected and used against you. And there's kind of two parts to that. One is, why can't you have a separation between here's what I want known about me publicly, and here's what I prefer to keep private? Not because you're a bad person, but just because you prefer to have some level and modicum of privacy. But then there's another piece of this which is really fundamental to our democracy. And even though in the Constitution, the Founding Fathers did not use the word privacy, we know the Founding Fathers are very clear throughout their arguments, throughout anything that you read that says, if citizens believe that they are under surveillance and they are not free to speak against, whether it's big business or some issue or against government than democracy does, right? So we didn't get it all right as founding fathers, but they got a lot right. And so to me, the idea that Cambridge Analytica could happen under our watch in this country, there's thousands of points of data on you and me, and who knows what they packaged it up with and sold to somebody else. Who knows if they've even been a victim of a data breach, right? As soon as you sell that data to somebody, you have no idea how they do duty of care to take care of that data. So there will be some fundamental framework that'll be given, and it's going to have multi-pieces. So one is sort of that personal identifiable information, but then the other is patterns of life and belief systems and how that's handled. Great question. Why don't I'll move to the middle of the room. So we've one over here, and then I'll come back over to you, sir.
Can I ask what your background was before becoming the White House CIO?
Oh, sure. Okay, so real quick. So I'm the daughter and a granddaughter of the U.S. Marine Corps. I married a guy in the Navy. From a college perspective, my undergraduate studies, I got a double major in business administration and economics, and I got a certification in computers. And so I went to Immaculata University, which at the time was an all-women's Catholic college. It's co-ed now. And then when I was at Immaculata University, getting ready to graduate and getting ready to get married to, who's now my husband, he was already out in the Navy from the Naval Academy. And I got a call out of the blue one day from the University of Virginia, and they had started a Master of Science in Management Information Systems program, and no women applied. And so I said, well, I'm getting ready to get married. I'm not really sure if this really fits into the plan. Kind of got to ask this fiance of mine how he feels about that. And I said, well, it's a full ride scholarship. So you just need to come in here, do research assistantship, keep your grades up, and do a teaching assistantship, and we'll pay. And so they're kind of that first test of what's going to be a good marriage. I throw this out to my fiance, and he says, you need to take it. Like, hearing an opportunity like that, like, don't worry about me, we'll figure it all out. So I went to University of Virginia, and I was coding artificial intelligence expert systems, big data analytics, code generators, and at the time, we actually talked about ethics and engineering. And those same things we were worried about, we're still worried about it. And I'll just tell you, I didn't graduate 5 years ago, right? So, I mean, it's been a long time, and we still have a lot of challenges in ethics and engineering. My husband then got orders for Mayport, Florida. And I don't know if you know much about Mayport, Florida a couple decades ago, but it wasn't really a hotbed for somebody coming out saying, I'm going to invent the next new thing. I don't know what it is, but I'm super excited. Yeah, I go to Mayport, I'm interviewing at, kind of the Coffee Roasters Company and Florida Rock Industries and Florida Power and Light, really great companies, but they weren't ready for what I was ready to do. They were asking me like, how's your mainframe programming skills, right? That kind of stuff. So I was really fortunate. I got this amazing opportunity at Barnett Bank, which is now part of Bank of America. And I told them what I wanted to do. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to do cutting edge technology. I want to change, customer experiences and interactions with technology, and I want to make a difference. So they said, fantastic. And so they had me, one of the first things that I did there as a programmer was to actually create one of the largest sort of data marts around our customers' interaction at our branches and our phone channel and ATMs. And it was sort of like the early behavioral-based analytics. And I will tell you, at the time, I was not worried about the security of the data. I was focused on making sure we anticipated what you needed and giving it to you without you asking. And so I kind of look back on that now and I think, oh my gosh, right? But it was great training. And what I realized was so there I am in the innovative, cutting-edge stuff, just so blessed, really amazing job, great managers. Although it was funny, I was the first female to join my development group. And so they're like, we thought we were getting a new developer. I'm like, I'm her. And they're like, you know how to code? I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna work extra hard to win these guys over. And I did, and they were fabulous, and they taught me so much. And what was interesting though was I learned that I was on the cutting edge of fraud, crime, money laundering, terror financing, and I didn't like that. And it was almost like this switch flipped in me from our family's U.S. military and law enforcement, no entrepreneurs. And certainly nobody in sort of the professional services industries. And I was like, I need to fight fraud, I need to fight crime. So I kind of made the switch. I was actually at Bank of America when the White House called And so I had 16 years in financial services. I had global development teams. I had responsibility for fraud and security and delivering technology. So like I'd have the internet channel and I'd have the fraud and security of the channel as well. And so when they called me, I almost didn't return the call. I thought I was being socially engineered. I came back, I was sleep deprived, just had my second child, I've got 3. And so I come back to the desk after a long day and my EA's like, hey Teresa, the White House called. And I said, the apple juice company or the clothing company? And she said, no, the one in Washington, D.C. And I said, am I in trouble? And she said, no, silly, they want a new chief information officer for President George W. Bush. And I said, okay, hold on. And they called little old me. I was having a baby, like I'm working a merger and acquisition for Bank of America. I'm like, I don't know anybody on the campaign, didn't work the campaign. It's not real. I'm not gonna call back. And she says, oh, I talked to them for like an hour. They know you very well. I'm like, who did you talk to for an hour? And so she made me call back, and I was very cheeky actually, and said, John, and I joke about this, so I called and I said, is this John? And he says, yes. And I said, I heard President Bush would like to know if I'm interested in interviewing for his chief information officer. He says, yeah, that's right. And I said, okay, and so is the president gonna call me, or is he just too busy? And he says, well, of course he's very busy. I'm like, okay, so he had you call me. And he's like, yes. And I said, I don't believe you. I think you're totally full of it. And I said, I don't know anybody there. I just came back from maternity leave. And he said, I know, you've been on maternity leave for 6 weeks. So I just kind of stopped and I said, you know that? Did Mary tell you that? He said, no, we've been waiting for you to come back to work. And I said, we who, right? So we kind of had this back and forth. So I had him, so he said, look, if you go to whitehouse.gov, not whitehouse.com, because that's a porn site. That was a porn site at the time, right? He said, go to whitehouse.gov, and he said, there's a phone number there for the White House operator. Hang up, call that number, and then ask for me. So still being sleep deprived and sort of in my cheeky, mode, I do that, and then John picks up the phone. So that's what started the vetting process, which was also kind of interesting. And what was interesting when I interviewed with them, I said to them, how could I possibly be qualified for this job? I've been in financial services for 16 years. And he said, well, you have 24/7 responsibilities. You are building technologies that people want to use. You understand fraud and security. You almost didn't return my call, so you can't be socially engineered. He said, and by the way, we did a preliminary background check. You'll pass the background check for your clearance, which is not easy to do. He mentioned that the president wanted more females and minorities, so they were specifically going out and recruiting more females and minorities. And he said, I think you're going to be surprised how much of the work you do will transfer over. And he was right. So they offered me the job, and then I went and did that 2.5 years. So was that a good? Okay. So I tried to kind of condense it as much as I could. But,
Thank you.
so that was my all-time favorite job ever. And I would say my second favorite job is exactly what I get to do now at my company with doing cybersecurity and intel operations. Absolutely, very blessed. Thank you. There was a gentleman in the peach shirt.
I was a little surprised by the Cambridge Analytica.
Yes.
Because I remembered something back from 2012 where, the Obama's people were bragging about the data that they got out of Facebook. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
And so I'm going, what is different, or was Cambridge Analytica that much different than what happened in 2012?
So what's interesting is that the beef, I think, is at the heart of it is with Facebook, people were joining groups, they were liking things, they were posting things, and they were getting that kind of information. With Cambridge Analytica, the data points they got were like data dumps of address books and who's connected to who, what private groups you belong to, whether or not you've changed your gender more than once. And so I think that's where people kind of had this like, wait a minute, this is on a level. But I agree with you, that was kind of the, hey, look, the reason why, we were able to elect a young modern president was because of young modern technology. And that was the discussion. But it's like the whole data gathering and packaging went to a whole other level that people, even on both sides of the aisle and independents, have said, wow, that's kind of incredible and seems like a violation of trust. Even though everybody clicked okay for the most part on a 4-point font. privacy policy.
4.1.
Yeah, 4.5. Do you agree? Is it like 4.5?
No, that's, I'm sorry, I didn't even know you had the option to click no on that policy.
Well, it won't work.
Yeah. I mean, like, you click no, and it's like, you didn't click yes, please click again.
Yeah, and that's where I think you're gonna see something will come out that says you get an opportunity to
Well, that was,
opt in
yeah,
or opt
that
out
was the
of
biggest,
sharing.
that was a question I was gonna ask, but, well, with this new thing coming up, are you actually gonna have an opt-out capability? I mean, like, cause like right now, you have the option to opt in or nothing.
Right, I mean, I think, so the question was, will there be an opt-out opportunity? And you have a voice. And so yes, you are up against lobbying firms who are lobbying against that, but you have a voice. Do you remember when we all had old school hardline phones in our homes? I still do, because I don't totally trust the resilience of the internet. So AT&T and I have a battle every year over keeping that copper wire at my house. But I'm like, look, I have the phone channel. It's got 99.99997 reliability and resiliency. And I know you can't sniff packets over the phone lines. You need a warrant. And again, I'm not talking about anything I don't care about, but I know you have to have a warrant to listen in on my phone line. Voice over IP is a little bit more generic around that, right? It's information packets that we're talking about here. But I do believe, if you think about those old school phone lines, remember how you would get all these phone calls from telemarketers, and finally consumers said, I can't handle this. Like, I keep getting up from the dinner table to answer the phone, and it's not who I think it is, or there's these weird tactics, or these spoof phone numbers. And so you now have the do not call registry. As inelegant as it is, it works. Because the minute somebody tries to sell me something, when I answer the line, I'm like, I thought you were my kid's school. No, I'm like, you need to put me on your do not call list, right? And it works. And so it will work, but you have to speak up. You have to tell Congress and the Senate that this is what you want. So the lobbyists are doing it. You got to give them your side of the argument. And it will happen. It will happen. Yes, sir.
I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen more successful attacks on our infrastructure, such as electric grid, water treatment. Are we good or just lucky?
Yeah, so we'll do both, and there's also things you don't know about too. But so a couple of things that give me a lot of hope. So let me go over the bright spots first. That we actually, a couple times a year, every single one of those critical infrastructures does an exercise, and the exercise feels so real that we actually have at the top and bottom of emails, exercise, 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 this is a drill.
Like the missile attack.
Yeah, like the Hawaiian missile attack. Yeah, almost exactly like that, except for people didn't think they were gonna die, right? And so, yeah, so those tests go on every year, and they change it up, and there's a hot wash done after it's over around what's missing to protect critical infrastructure. The second piece is then there are technical exercises where both security researchers and other individuals are asked to, under rules of engagement, to go after pieces of critical infrastructure. Security researchers don't wait for rules of engagement, so they really provide a really valuable service. I just spent time with a couple really amazing security researchers while I was at RSA, including Chris Roberts, who, as you know, got ejected from a plane by saying, yeah, I got to the entertainment system and I can see control systems in the cockpit, so hello. And so then he actually got ejected from a United Airlines flight for that, but he's still right back at it and doing what he's doing. So those are kind of things on the hopeful side that give me a lot of hope. The other piece is, so this is kind of a strange way to look at it, but there's almost some security through kind of the obscurity piece of it, right? So there's not common elements where we've standardized on a platform for critical infrastructure, and so because of that, you actually have some redundancy and some resiliency within sort of like if you think about energy, for example, so you've got the generation piece, and then you've got how do you transport the generation down to the local level. And there's actually redundancy and reliability to some degree. Now, obviously, we have rolling brownouts still. Poor Puerto Rico, it's a terrible situation there. But you do have where some parts of the critical infrastructure have been upgraded. Where I get concerned So for example, I don't know if you know this, but there was an Australian wastewater treatment plant, and hackers, basically to make a point, actually sent raw sewage into the neighborhood, just because they could. And so we have these opportunities where there's these gaps and vulnerabilities that if somebody that's bored or has nefarious intent could take over those control systems. And so each one of those to me is a wake-up call, and you actually see those exercised a couple times a year across each one of the critical infrastructures. But it does, it keeps me up at night. Definitely keeps me up at night. Bless you. Question over here.
A little bit on bounce off of that. I'm curious what your thoughts are on something if our government should institute something like a bug bounty instead of sending the FBI and jailing people that may be trying to show vulnerabilities that may, let's say, gray hat, but maybe proving that these exist, and by doing that, hopefully making us more secure. It seems like anytime there is something like that, you see the high school or whatever that gets into something, gets off to the feds for a little while.
Yeah, and I would love to see that. There's actually been some discussions. So we work with the Department of Homeland Security, and we've actually talked to them. But yeah, as you know, there's a whole level of sort of governance that you have to put in place when you announce it. I have a bug bounty, right? So you look at an organization that does it very well. Google is one. And we actually participate in capture the flag contests. And so my recommendation to the government was, why don't we do capture the flag first? Because capture the flag can be, you simulate something, you see how people approach it, you see what kind of attack vectors they use, and then you don't have to let them know exactly where the issue is. And then you can apply those learnings back to where the issue is. And that's probably where they need to dip their toes in the water first before they announce a bug bounty, because I cannot even imagine how much would be found, and sort of you kind of get those lone wolves who just want to make a point, and yeah.
That's scarier to me though, because
I know
how much would be found, but it's not found, so who knows what's better.
I mean, the good news is, as far as kind of a talent, there is a war for talent, but the one thing I've seen the government do really well is they do scholarship for service, so they're getting some of the brightest minds out of college, and that's a way for them to pay for school. And then they are paying a pay differential for people who go into cybersecurity in government. So that's helping them sort of close the gap and be able to recruit more people that have creative minds, and then they're doing more rotations. So for example, what you'll see is NSA, CIA, and FBI will actually do rotational assignments into critical infrastructure. So what they're seeing on sort of the intelligence side or law enforcement side, they might go on a one-year detail into some of the critical infrastructure departments and agencies and bring all that knowledge with them to the team. So you're kind of leaving the team better than they found it. But I think before you see bug bounty, you'll see capture the flag first. I love that idea, and I think it's, we're sort of 10 years behind the curve on that for government and infrastructure. Yes, I think there's somebody over here.
So just in regards to critical infrastructure, you mentioned part of the reason why we haven't, US, I'm from Australia obviously, and we've had worse things than the sewage thing happened recently. Someone actually wheeled out like a storage unit with full of government documents, and it was found in like a second-hand shop, so we're all over it. So in regards to critical infrastructure, and just painting a little bit of a view of the future, right? So we're here at a technology skewed event. What do you think about self-driving cars? Because you mentioned before the lack of standardization is what has meant that potentially the hacks aren't there. So you suddenly have either your Tesla or you have your phone.
Sorry, that's my alarm telling me to go to questions. So there you go. That's one of my favorite songs. Okay, so back to what you're saying about sort of the self-driving cars,
so like
type of technology.
Sort of casting your eye out into sort of 10, 20 years down the
Sure.
road, that will be a standardized sort of platform, probably from all the different vendors in that space. And to me, I just see that as just the ultimate in hacking and causing widespread chaos and disaster. So have you thought about the future in that regard? And,
Sure. Yeah, so let me, again, I'm going to focus on what I like about the future, what I'm excited about before I get into the doomsday, because I'm trying to make sure I give people hope and you don't walk out of here saying, gosh, I need a drink. I mean, you might need a drink, but I don't want it to be because of me. So on what I love about the technology that's coming out now and sort of in the next 10 years or so, a couple of things. Machine-to-machine learning. What I love about the machine-to-machine learning is it's helping me actually, so I've always had this design philosophy, which I had at the White House, and it's the reason why we were so successful in not having a data breach while I was there, as well as really good people, as well as luck. Somebody had asked about that as well. And one of the things we did was our philosophy was, if we see a transaction that's anomalous, kill first, ask questions later. Not the person, the technology. So I did not have the drone program. So but I had that trust from senior staff at the White House that I wasn't going to do it for everything, but things that really mattered, that were high priority, that's what we would do. We would kill first, ask questions later, and then in some cases we would delay and we actually go to a queue and an analyst would look at it and then let the transaction go through. That machine-to-machine learning, I had to build all that from scratch. So machine-to-machine learning in real time with big data analytics actually sees the anomalies, presents the anomalies, and you can do that in a much simpler fashion than you could with kind of the internal proprietary software we built. Secondly, one of the big friction points for a lot of your customers, these small businesses, is the more complicated you make it for them to get to their data, the more they work outside of the norms. So as soon as you start talking to people about two-factor authentication, it's not turned on, they don't like to use it, and that's usually how some of these wire transfer frauds, bank equipment purchase frauds, and things like that are happening. What I see now is the friction is starting to be removed where you can actually do multi-factor authentication, and 10 years from now, it's just going to kind of know it's you. Right, so there's going to be a lot of things that it's going to know about you, and it's not just biometric, it's where do you stand, how do you touch things, are you a left swipe or a right swipe when you're looking at information, do you swipe up really fast or do you swipe down really slow? So there's going to be a lot of things that are behavioral based that it's going to be hard for somebody to mimic you, and it's not just voice print and iris scans and things like that. So that, to me, is sort of the journey we're on now, where you could actually say, you know what, everybody's just user ID and password. Until it's time to actually look at invoices and decide what you're going to wire transfer and what you're not. Now we're going to do multi-factor authentication. And where that used to be looking up a token, or it used to be, I'm looking for my phone now and I'm trying to type in the code and I did it too short, I took too long and now it expired. Now you can have a tablet and it says, is this you? And you hit yes, and you kind of multi-factor authenticate in. So that's not nirvana, obviously. You're still doing user ID and password, but you've got this opportunity to remove friction, and that's only going to get better over time. So that's another technology I'm super excited about. On quantum computing, and then I'll get into what I'm not excited about, and it keeps me up at night. So on let's go to blockchain. So on blockchain, which was, a lot of you probably associate blockchain with cryptocurrency. So you think Bitcoin mining, you think Monero. And what's interesting is yes, it does help those transactions be secure, but blockchain in and of itself is its own technology. And what I love about blockchain, sort of back to kind of the conversation we were having earlier about your social security numbers everywhere, what I love about it is you could actually pass what's now personally identifiable information in a more secure, encrypted way using blockchain, and it's resilient and reliable. So for example, your healthcare identity, your passport, your filing for visa privileges to work in the United States, the deed to your home, the deed to your car, all that kind of stuff could actually be passed instead of over email or on DocuSign, which is, a great platform, but blockchain is still really clunky to implement and very expensive, but as it becomes more commercially available, there's a lot about blockchain that I think is really, really helpful technology. So let's see, machine learning, okay. And then, so that to me, looking out, that gives me a lot of hope, and I think we'll be able to, I look at the security industry and I say, just anybody in here, name one problem that existed 20 years ago from a digital security perspective that as a security professional, that myself and my colleagues actually eliminated for you? Not made it less, eliminated. Can you name one? Can't name one, can you? Passwords, still have them, left over from the mainframe days. Anything else we solved? We haven't solved anything for you. But we're on the cusp of taking some of those things and actually solving it for you with these advanced technologies. Quantum computing. There's really truly an arms race right now with quantum computing. So you've got China, you have Russia, the United States, the EU. Everybody's trying to kind of really do quantum computing at scale. Now, just you know, if you love trees, quantum computing is not a friend of the environment based on how it's executed today. And if you don't like balmy weather, it's not. So like, for example, Russia, they're putting all their quantum computing, they're building out their data centers in Siberia. There's a reason. So yeah, I mean, it will definitely contribute to emissions and global warming, the way it's designed today. But what I love about quantum computing is the processing speed that you're gonna get with that. So I'm a total geek, so I think about things sort of at the developer level. But all the things that you develop are translated behind the scenes, no matter how cool and elegant and sexy that app may look, it's ones and zeros behind the scenes. And so on a computer, you have a state, you're either on or you're off. But on quantum computing, it's stateless. Everything can be zeros and ones at the same time. And so now the ability to take, you know, data, for example, on all past cancer cases, and to crunch the numbers and say, I know how to do a custom treatment, and now I actually know how to do a cure, because you can actually, from a mathematical perspective, solve those problems. So that all, to me, I'm super excited about the future, and this is all technology, you know, from here through the next 10 years, you're gonna be able to use in your business, and you're gonna be able to use with your customers. Now, what scares me about that? So let's go back to the self-driving car. Everybody knows we had, you know, a human victim, self-driving car with a human being that was supposed to be the override. And the human being, no offense to him, but he is a habitual offender of traffic violations. So why that was the human being that was the stopgap, I have no idea. But let's talk about sort of there's a hacking piece, and then there's an engineering framework piece that we haven't figured out yet, so the ethics in the framework. When you build AI, when you build artificial intelligence, which is part of what powers autonomous driving, the biases of the engineer, both conscious and unconscious, are in that code. So let's back away from the car for a perspective just for a minute, and let's go to lending. So we know in this country for many years, we had a problem in lending where, based on how you looked, and potentially what your ethnic background or even your faith-based background was, or your personal life choices, you may or may not actually get granted a loan. We actually know in recent history, if women were not married, they weren't given a mortgage, right? So when you look at that and you look at how hard we've worked and other nations have worked to take those societal biases and change the cultural norms and to push back and to make sure there's a governance process to make sure that you're not, what's in banking we call it redlining, that you're not redlining communities, and that they're getting access to capital and they're getting access to, you know, financial services. Okay, fast forward, when you go to AI, when an engineer builds that black box that's self-aware and self-learning, only the engineer knows what they put in there, and at some point the AI starts to learn without the engineer. So if you take lending, and there's any kind of bias, unconscious or conscious, and you've got a loan processor, and they're just getting an answer and giving you the yes or the no, they don't know how it was built, they don't know what the biases are. So then you go to sort of the self-driving thing, and you play through like the trolley dilemma. So have any of you heard sort of the trolley dilemma when you think about expert systems and AI? So the trolley dilemma is, and I just got from San Francisco so I can visualize this, if you have a trolley going down a hill, and they realize on both tracks, on one track there is a trolley car broken down with people on it, on the other track is a car broken down with a family in it, how do you make a decision? And so based on the trolley's driver's experience and their heart and their mind and their moral compass, they're going to try and make the least worst decision. So they may think to themselves, well, if I go that track where the trolley is, I know it's full, but a trolley to trolley, probably less catastrophic than trolley to family car. Or they may say, oh, well, I don't know, the family car's a little further away, I might be able to slow down a little bit even though my brakes are not working. And so they make all these judgment calls, clearly not available in autonomous driving cars. And clearly, and then the other thing that I've seen, I was just with the CIO for an insurance company. They integrated AI chatbots to help with customer service, and they said customers love it because AI chatbots, they never have a bad day. They're never grumpy, right? And you know, they don't have an attitude. They just kind of do what they do. I mean, until we started programming attitude into the AI bots. But what they had realized, they had an inspection process of those AI bots, and what they realized was they were actually escalating privileges to each other and giving each other access that was never intended by the developers or by the use case. And so if they hadn't inspected what they expected, they realized all these chatbots had access to LAN passwords, they had admin passwords, they had customer data, and so they had to go back to sort of square one. So did that help answer your question?
Yeah, that's a pretty good answer.
Yes, sir.
So a couple of questions. I mean, even before autonomous driving, we still have smart homes that, I don't know how many of y'all know how secure your smart homes and your smart technology is, as far as you got alarm access from your mobile device, you have, you know, door lock access, you have camera access, you have all these things now with Echo and Google Home and all that stuff, the Alexas. As far as your learning goes, will that kind of security eventually filter into the home automation and stuff like that?
So that's a great question. And so what I want everybody to be thinking about for your businesses and for your customers is, with Internet of Things, I want you to integrate that technology. So let me give you a piece of advice on how to do that, sort of like a homework assignment on how to think about that, and then let me come back to why the Internet of Things will always be insecure forever. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. The way to integrate these newer technologies, whether it's machine-to-machine learning, autonomous driving, whether it's Internet of Things, is I want you to think about your data in zones of information. And actually think about, where does it merit having logical and physical separation between those zones of information. So I'll give you an example. At the White House, I don't know if you know this, but every single chicken breast, filet mignon, lobster, roll of toilet paper, tube of toothpaste, and every flower stem, every fern has a barcode, which the White House produces and puts on it. And when I first did my walkabout, there's 13 components that make up the Executive Office of the President, and I did my walkabouts to kind of learn more and find out what we were not doing well. And so I'm always like, I'm Teresa, what are we doing well, what are we not doing well, which is usually a longer list, right, when you're the CIO. And one of the things I noticed was everything had a barcode on it. And so, for example, when they would get the chicken breast out, they would scan the barcode, and then they would put it over here. Same thing with the flowers in the flower shop at the White House. And I realized they were self-produced, and the reason being was not just supply chain to make sure you don't run out, also security of the supply chain, making sure nothing's like, laced with anthrax with love from Russia. But the third and the real reason was because in America, the things that go on in the White House get charged to different buckets of money because of appropriations bills. So if the person eating the chicken breast is actually the Queen of England, that's one bucket of money. If the person enjoying the flower arrangement, it's actually in the personal residence. I'm not kidding, this is really how this works. And so if you think about it, like I had this huge logistics supply chain amount of data. But then over on the other side, I have the president's schedule, which is everywhere he's going to be, all the Secret Service agents assigned, who's on duty, down to the second. And so I had those in two separate zones of information, because in the usher's office, I needed to have everything looked historical and elegant and sort of, tuxedos, but I had to make sure they were as modern as possible to make sure everything ran smoothly. But then I decided that the president's schedule, if it were stolen, that's me telling me I gotta wrap up. I get so excited I lose all track of time, and I have to catch the last flight out tonight to run in the Disney Star Wars races with my family. So back to, so I want you to design those zones of information, and then back to sort of the Internet of Things.
So we work with one of the largest Internet of Things manufacturers in the world, and we help their engineers on the proactive side think about security in the design. However, that shiny little package that you buy off the shelf, sometimes there's 3 to 5 different versions by different coding development organizations for firmware and operating system. And then all the gadgets and the circuitry, they may come from tens to hundreds of different vendors. And so the idea that you're gonna buy a shiny object that's packaged and looks really cool, and that's gonna be secure, it's not. So if you do those zones of information, and you come up with logical and physical separation, you can take whatever you deem as the president's schedule and not allow them access to that, knowing that's gonna always be a fault entry point to your data. Does that make sense? So I've got time for one more question. Which way should I go? Okay, over here. Yes, sir.
With some of the high-profile, like email hacks that we've seen, DNC, things like that, how often would you say, in your experience, is it a result of social engineering first versus some sort of actual digital exploit?
Sure. No, that's a great question. I will tell you, because we do a lot of incident response, the majority of the entry points when they're going to try and get into the organization, the majority is through spear phishing. So if you can find a way, there's a couple things I want everybody to think about for a homework assignment. The first is to ask your, whoever does your IT team, and also mention this to your customers, make sure they've paid attention to the DMARC and the SPF header record. If this is great to you, that's okay. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will make sure I send this to you. The next thing is create for sort of special movement of information. It might be intellectual property, merger and acquisition due diligence, money transfers, equipment purchase transfers. Create a domain name that has nothing to do with your public-facing domain name and have a protocol for using that. So that way, most of that engineering is around give me your money and acting like you're the CEO. So that will actually combat that. So even if it gets through, they'll look at that and say, well, that's not my CEO, because we don't do wire transfers here, we do them over here. Then the last piece to be thinking about as it relates to this is there are times where the social engineering doesn't work, so they use vulnerabilities. And I will tell you, so social engineering is the #1 way we see cyber criminals get into organizations when we do forensics. #2 is weak admin passwords on your remote servers that give people remote access to work from home. Those 2 are the top 2 that we see based on our forensics cases. Then we get into #3, typically ends up being very sophisticated hackers who have scanned your network for vulnerabilities, found the vulnerability, they get the kit, they go after the vulnerabilities. So that's how that works. So with that, it has been, I hate that I have to run out of here because you guys are amazing. I would say my favorite group so far. And so I would say my favorite group, and I did not say that to the last 2 groups. You were there, although I love them dearly. But it's been my honor and pleasure to be here with you. I hope I gave you some things to think about differently when you go back to the office and you take care of your customers. I would love to be, good guys, we got to stick together. So if I really mean it, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I may not be Johnny on the spot always answering things, but I want to make sure that I can be a resource for you because you're helping small and medium-sized businesses be healthy and successful through what you do. So thank you so much, everybody.